everyone. Yesterday in our story, we left off at the Quidditch practice. So Gryffindor was at Quidditch practice, and all of a sudden the Slytherins came. And who do we find is the new Slytherin seeker? Is Draco Malfoy. Okay, so we're at the point now where there was a fight broke out at the Quidditch pitch, and that's where we'll start today. Ron, are you all right? Squealed Hermione. Ron opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he gave an almighty belch, and several slugs dribbled out of his mouth on his lap. The Slytherin team were paralyzed with laughter. Flint was doubled up, hanging on his new broomstick for support. Malfoy was on all fours, banging on the ground with his fist. The Gryffindors were gathered around Ron, who kept belching large, glistening slugs. Nobody seemed to want to touch him. "We'd better get him to Hagrid's. It's nearest," said Harry to Hermione, who nodded bravely, and the pair pulled Ron up by the arms. "What happened, Harry? What happened? Is he ill? But you can cure him, can't you?" Colin had run down from his seat and was now dancing alongside them as they left the pitch. Ron gave a huge heave, and more slugs dribbled down his front. "Oh," said Colin, fascinated, raising his camera. "Can you hold him still, Harry?" "Get out of the way, Colin," said Harry angrily. And he and Hermione supported Ron out of the stadium and onto the grounds, towards the edge of the forest. "Nearly there, Ron," said Hermione, as the gamekeeper's cabin came into view. "You'll be all right in a minute, almost there." They were within 20 feet of Hagrid's house when the front of the door opened, but it wasn't Hagrid who emerged. Gilderoy Lockhart, wearing robes of the palest mauve today, came striding out. "Quick, behind here," Harry hissed, dragging Ron behind a nearby bush. Hermione followed somewhat reluctantly. "It's a simple matter, if you know what you're doing," Lockhart was saying loudly to Hagrid. "If you need help, you know where I am. I'll let you have a copy of my book. I'm surprised you haven't already got one. I'll sign it tonight and send it right over. Well, goodbye," and he strode off towards the castle. Harry waited until Lockhart was out of sight, and then pulled Ron out of the bush up to Hagrid's front door, and then they knocked urgently. Hagrid appeared at once, looking very grumpy, but his expression brightened when he saw who it was. "Been wondering when you'd come to see me. Come in. Thought you might have been Professor Lockhart again." Harry and Hermione supported Ron over the threshold into the one-roomed cabin, which had an enormous bed in one corner, a fire cracking merrily in another. Hagrid didn't seem perturbed by Ron's slug problem, which Harry had hastily explained as he lowered Ron onto the chair. "Better out than in," he said cheerfully, plunking one of the copper basin from him. "Get him up, Ron." "I don't think there's anything to do except wait for it to stop," said Hermione anxiously, watching Ron bend over the basin. "That's a difficult curse to work at best of the times, but with a broken wand." Hagrid was bustling around making them tea. His boarhound, Fang, was slobbering over Harry. "What did Lockhart want with you, Hagrid?" Harry asked, scratching Fang's ears. "Giving me advice on getting kelpies out of a ground," growled Hagrid, moving a half-plucked rooster off the scrub table and sitting down the teapot. "Like I don't know, and banging on about some banshee he banished. If one word of it was true, I'll eat my kettle." It was most unlike Hagrid to criticize a Hogwarts teacher, and Harry looked at him in surprise. Hermione, however, said in a voice somewhat higher than usual, "I think you're being a bit unfair. Professor Dumbledore obviously thought he was the best man for the job." "He was the only man for the job," said Hagrid, offering them plate of treacle toffee, while Ron coughed squelchly into his basin. "And I mean the only one. Getting very difficult to find anyone for the dark arts job. People aren't too keen to take it. They're starting to think that it's jinx. No one's lasted long for a while." "So tell me," said Hagrid, jerking his head at Ron, "who was you trying to curse?" "Malfoy." Malfoy called Hermione something. It must have been really bad, because everyone went mad. "It was bad," said Ron hoarsely, emerging over the tabletop, looking pale and sweaty. "Malfoy called her Mudblood, Hagrid." Ron dived out of sight as a fresh wave of slugs made their appearance. Hagrid looked outraged. "He didn't," he growled at Hermione. "He did," she said, "but I don't know what it means. I could tell it was really rude, of course." It's the most insulting thing he could think of, gasped Ron, coming up. Mudblood's a really foul name for someone who's muggle-born. Non-magical parents. There are some wizards, like Malfoy's family, who thinks they're better than everyone else because they're what people call pureblood. He gave a small burp and a single slug fell onto the outstretched hand. He threw it into the basin and continued. I mean, the rest of us know it doesn't make any difference at all. Look at Neville Longbottom. He's pureblood and he can hardly stand a cauldron up the right way. And they haven't invented a spell our Hermione can't do, said Hagrid proudly, making Hermione go a brilliant shade of magenta. It's a disgusting thing to call some people, Ron said, wiping his sweaty brow with a shaking hand. Dirty blood, see, common name, it's mad. Most wizards these days are half-blood anyway. If we hadn't married muggles, we'd have died out. He retched and ducked out of sight again. Well, I don't blame you for trying to curse him, Ron, said Hagrid loudly for the thuds of more slugs hitting the basin. But maybe it was a good thing you had your wand backfired. Expect Lucius Malfoy would have come marching up to the school if you cursed his son. At least you're not in trouble. Harry would have pointed out that trouble didn't come much worse than having slugs pouring out of your mouth. But he couldn't. Hagrid's treacle toffee had cemented his jaws together. Harry, said Hagrid suddenly, as though struck by a sudden thought, got a bone to pick with you. I've heard you've been giving out signed photos. How come I haven't got one? Furious, Harry wrenched his teeth apart. I have not been giving out signed photos, he said hotly. If Lockhart's still putting that about. But then he saw Hagrid was laughing. I'm only joking, he said, patting Harry on the back and sending him face first into the table. I knew you hadn't really. I told Lockhart you didn't need to. You're more famous than him without trying. But he didn't like that, said Harry. Bet he didn't like that, said Harry, sitting up, rubbing his chin. Don't think he did, said Hagrid, his eyes twinkling. And then I told him I never read one of his books, and he decided to go. Treacle toffee, Ron? He added as Ron reappeared. No thanks, said Ron weakly. Better not risk it. Come on, see what I've been growing, said Hagrid as Harry and Hermione finished the last of their tea. In a small vegetable patch behind Hagrid's garden were a dozen of the largest pumpkins Harry had ever seen. Each was the size of a boulder. Getting on well, aren't they? Said Hagrid happily. For the Halloween feast, should be big enough by then. What have you been feeding them? Harry asked. Hagrid looked over at his shoulder and checked that they were alone. Well, I've been giving them, a bit of help. Harry noticed Hagrid's flowery pink umbrella leaning against the back wall of the cabin. Harry had reason to believe before now that this umbrella was not at all as it looked. In fact, he had a strong impression that Hagrid's old-school wand was concealed inside of it. Hagrid wasn't supposed to do magic. He'd been expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year, but Harry had never found out why. And he mentioned the matter, and Hagrid would clear his throat loudly and become mysteriously deaf until the subject was changed. An engorgement charm, I suppose? Said Hermione, halfway between the disapproval and amusement. Well, you've done a good job on them. That's what your little sister said, Hagrid said, nodding at Ron. Met her just yesterday. Hagrid looked sideways at Harry, his beard twitching. Said she was just looking around the grounds, but I reckon she was hoping she might run into someone else at my house. He winked at Harry. If you ask me, she wouldn't say no to a signed. Oh, shut up, said Harry. Ron snorted with laughter, and the ground was sprayed with slugs. Watch it, Hagrid roared, pulling Ron away from his precious pumpkins. It was nearly lunchtime, and as Harry had only one bit of treacle toffee since dawn, he was keen to go back to school to eat. They said goodbye to Hagrid and walked up to the castle. Ron was coughing occasionally, but only bringing up 2 very small slugs. They had barely set foot in the cool entrance hall when a voice rang out. There you are, Potter, Weasley, said Professor McGonagall, walking towards them looking stern. You both will do your detention this evening. What are we doing, Professor? Said Ron, nervously suppressing a burp. You will be polishing the silver in the trophy room with Mr. Filch, said Professor McGonagall. And no magic, Weasley. Elbow grease. Ron gulped. Argus Filch was the caretaker and loathed every student in the school. And you, Potter, will be helping Professor Lockhart answer his fan mail, said Professor McGonagall. Oh no, can't I go to the trophy room too? Said Harry desperately. Certainly not, said Professor McGonagall, raising her eyebrows. Professor Lockhart was requested you particularly. 8 o'clock sharp, both of you. Ron and Harry slouched into the great hall in the states of the deepest of glooms. Hermione sat behind them, worrying. Oh, well, you didn't break the school rules sort of expression. Harry didn't fancy his shepherd's pie as much as he thought. Both he and Ron felt that they got the worst deal. Filch will have me there all night, said Ron heavily. No magic. There must be 100 cups in that room. I'm no good at muggle cleaning. I'd swap any time, said Harry hollowly. I've had lots of practice with the Dursleys. Answering Lockhart's fan mail, he'll be a nightmare. Saturday afternoon seemed to melt away in what seemed like no time at all. It was 5 minutes to 8, and Harry was dragging his feet to the second-floor corridor into Lockhart's office. He gritted his teeth and knocked. The door flew open at once, and Lockhart beamed at him. Ah, here's the scallywag, he said. Come in, Harry, come in. Shining brightly on the walls by the light of many candles were the countless framed photographs of Lockhart. He even signed a few of them. Another large pile lay on his desk. You can address the envelopes, Lockhart told Harry, as though this was a huge treat. The first one's to Gladys Gudgeon. God bless her, she's a fan of mine. The minutes snailed by. Harry let Lockhart's voice wash over him, occasionally saying, and right, and yeah. And now and then he caught a phrase like, fame's a fickle friend, Harry, or celebrity is as celebrity does. Remember that. The candles burned lower and lower, making the lights dance over the many moving faces of Lockhart watching him. Harry moved his aching hand over what felt like the 1,000th envelope, writing out Veronica Smedley's address. It must be nearly time to leave, Harry thought miserably. Please let it be nearly time. And then he heard something quite apart from the splitting of the dying candles and Lockhart prattle about fans. It was a voice that was chilled to the bone marrow, a voice of breathtaking ice-cold venom. Come to me, let me rip you, let me tear you, let me kill you. Harry gave a huge jump, and a large lilac blot appeared on Veronica Smedley's street. What? He said loudly. I know, said Lockhart. 6 solid months at the top of the bestseller list, broke all records. Nope, said Harry frantically, that voice. Sorry, said Lockhart, looked puzzled. What voice? That voice, didn't you hear it? Lockhart was looking at Harry in high astonishment. What are you talking about, Harry? Perhaps you're getting a little drowsy. Great Scott, look at the time. We've been here nearly 4 hours. Never believed it. Time's flown, hasn't it? Harry didn't answer. He was straining his ears to hear the voice again, but there was no sound except for Lockhart telling him he mustn't expect a treat like this every time he's got detention. Feeling dazed, Harry left. It was so late that the Gryffindor common room was almost empty. Harry went straight up to the dormitory. Ron wasn't back yet. Harry pulled on his pajamas and got into bed and waited. Half-hour later, Ron arrived, nourishing his right arm and bringing a strong smell of polish into the darkened room. My muscles have all seized up, he groaned, sinking into the bed. 14 times he made me buff up that Quidditch cup before he was satisfied. And then I had another slug attack all over a special award for services to the school. Took ages to shift the slime. How was it with Lockhart? Keeping his voice low not to wake Neville, Dean, and Seamus, Harry told Ron exactly what he had heard. And Lockhart couldn't hear it, said Ron. Harry looked at him frowning in the moonlight. Do you think he was lying? But I don't get it. Even someone invisible would have had to open the door. I know, said Harry, lying back on his 4-poster and staring at the canopy above him. I don't get it either. All right, let's continue into our next chapter, Chapter 8, The Death Day Party. October arrived, spreading a damp chill over the grounds and into the castle. Madame Pomfrey, the matron, was kept busy by a sudden spate of colds among the staff and students. Her pepper-up potion worked instantly, though it left the drinker smoking at the ears for several hours. Afterwards, Jenny Weasley, who had been looking peaky, was bullied into taking some by Percy. The steam pouring out from under her vivid hair gave the impression that her whole head was on fire. Raindrops the size of bullets thundered on the castle windows for days on end. The lake rose and the flower beds turned into muddy streams, and Hagrid's pumpkin swelled to the size of garden sheds. Oliver Wood's enthusiasm for regular training sessions, however, was not dampened, which was why Harry found to be late one stormy Saturday afternoon, a few days before Halloween, returning to the Gryffindor Tower drenched to the skin and splattered with mud. Even aside from the rain and wind, it hadn't been a happy practice session. Fred and George, who had been spying on the Slytherin team, had seen for themselves the speed of those Nimbus 2001s. They reported that the Slytherin team was no more than 7 greenish blurs shooting through the air like jump jets. As Harry squelched along a deserted corridor, he came across somebody who looked just as preoccupied as he was. Nearly Headless Nick, the ghost of Gryffindor Tower, was staring morosely out a window, muttering under his breath, "Don't fulfill the requirements half an inch if that." "Hello, Nick," said Harry. "Ah, hello, hello," said Nearly Headless Nick, starting to look around. He wore a dashing plumed hat on his long curly hair, and a tunic of ruff, which concealed the fact that his neck was almost completely severed. He was pale as smoke, and Harry could see through him the dark sky and the torrential rain outside. "You look troubled, young Potter," said Nick, folding a transparent letter as he spoke, tucking it inside his doublet. "So do you," said Harry. "Ah," Nearly Headless Nick waved an elegant hand. "A matter of no importance. It's not as though I really wanted to join. I just thought I'd apply, but apparently I don't fulfill the requirements." In spite of his airy tone, there was a look of great bitterness on his face. "But you would think, wouldn't you," he erupted suddenly, pulling the letter back out of his pocket, "that being hit 45 times in the neck with a blunt axe would qualify you to join the Headless Hunt?" "Oh, yes," said Harry, who was obviously supposed to agree. "I mean, nobody wishes more than I do that it had all been quick and clean and my head would come off properly. I mean, it would have saved me a great deal of pain and ridicule. However," Nearly Headless Nick shook his head and opened and read furiously, "we can only accept huntsmen whose heads have who have parted company with their bodies. You will appreciate that it would be otherwise impossible for members to participate in the hunt activities such as horseback head juggling and head polo. It is with the greatest regret, therefore, that I must inform you that you do not fulfill our requirements. With very best, Sir Patrick Delaney Podmore." Fuming, Nearly Headless Nick stuffed the letter away. "Half an inch! And the sinew holding my neck on, Harry. Most people would think that's good and beheaded, but oh, no, no, not for Sir Properly Decapitated Podmore." Nearly Headless Nick took several deep breaths, then said in a far calmer tone, "So what's bothering you? Anything I could do?" "No," said Harry, "not unless you know where we can get 7 free Nimbus 2001s. Our match against The rest of Harry's sentence was drowned by a high-pitched meowing from somewhere near his ankles. He looked down and he found himself gazing into a pair of lamp-like yellow eyes. It was Mrs. Norris, the skeletal gray cat who was used by caretaker Argus Filch, and sort of the deputy in his endless battle against students. "You better get out of here, Harry," said Nick quickly. "Filch is in a good mood. He's got the flu, and some third years accidentally plastered frog brains all over the ceiling in Dungeon 5. He's been cleaning all morning. If he sees you dripping mud all over the place—" "Right," said Harry, backing away from the accusing stare of Mrs. Norris, but not quickly enough. Drawn by the spot of the mysterious power that seemed to connect him with the foul cat, Argus Filch burst suddenly through the tapestry to Harry's right, wheezing and looking wildly about for the rule breaker. There was a thick tartan scarf bound around his head, with his nose unusually purple. "Filth!" he shouted, his jowls a-quiver and his eyes popping alarmingly. He pointed out to the mud that dripped from Harry's Quidditch robes. "Mush and muck everywhere. I've had enough of it, I tell you. Follow me, Potter." And so Harry waved a gloomy goodbye to Nearly Headless Nick and followed Filch back downstairs, doubling the number of muddy footprints on the floor. Harry had never been inside Filch's office before. It was a place where most students avoided. The room was dingy and windowless, lit by a single lamp dangling from the low ceiling. A faint smell of fried fish lingered about the place. Wooden filing cabinets stood around the walls. From their labels, Harry could see that they contained details of every pupil Filch had ever punished. Fred and George Weasley had an entire drawer to themselves. A highly polished collection of chains hung on the wall behind Filch's desk. It was common knowledge that he was always begging Dumbledore to let him suspend students by their ankles from the ceiling. Filch grabbed a quill from the pot and began shuffling around looking for parchment. "Dung," he muttered furiously. "Great sizzling dragon, boogies, frog brains, rat intestines. I've had enough of it. Make an example. Where's that form? Yes." He retrieved a large roll of parchment from his desk drawer and stretched it out in front of him, dipping his ink in the long black quill into the ink pot. "Name, Harry Potter. Crime." "Was only a bit of mud," said Harry. It's only a bit of mud to you, boy, but to me it's an extra hour of scrubbing, shouted Filch, a drib shivering and unpleasantly at the end of his bulbo's nose. Crime, befouling the castle, suggested sentences. Dabbing at the streaming nose, Filch squinted unpleasantly at Harry, who waited with bated breath for his sentence to fall. But as Filch lowered the quill, there was a great bang on the ceiling of the office, which made the oil lamp rattle. Peeves! Filch roared, flinging down his quill in transparent rage. I'll have you this time. I'll have you! Without backward glance at Harry, Filch ran flat-footed from the office, and Mrs. Norris streaking alongside him. Peeves was the school poltergeist, and a grinning airborne menace who lived to cause much havoc and distress. Harry didn't much like Peeves, but couldn't help feeling grateful for his timing. Hopefully, whatever Peeves had done, and sounded as though he would wreck something very big this time, would distract Filch from Harry. Thinking that he should probably wait for Filch to come back, Harry sat into the moth-eaten chair next to the desk. There was only one thing apart from his completed form, a large glossy purple envelope with silvering letter on the front. With a quick glance at the door to check that Filch wasn't there, Harry picked up the envelope and read. Quick spell, correspondent course in beginner's magic. Intrigued, Harry flicked the envelope open inside. More curly silver lettering on the front page. Feel out of step in the world of modern magic? Find yourself making excuses not to perform simple spells? Ever been taunted by your woeful wand work? This is the answer. Quick Spells is an all-new, fail-safe, quick-result, easy-to-learn course. Hundreds of witches and wizards have benefited from the Quick Spell method. Madame Z. Nettles of Topsham writes, I had no memory for incantations, and my potions were a family joke. Now, after a quick spell course, I am the center of attention at parties, and friends beg for the recipe of my Skintalian solution. Warlock Deji, proud of Didsbury, says, my wife used to stare at my feeble charms, but 1 month into your fabulous quick spell work, I succeeded in turning her into a yak. Thank you, Quick Spell. Fascinated, Harry thumbed through the rest of the envelope contents. Why on earth did Filch want a quick spell course? Did this mean he wasn't a proper wizard? Harry was reading Lesson 1, Holding Your Wand, some useful tips, when shuffling footsteps told him that Filch was coming back. Stuffing the parchment into the envelope, Harry threw it back onto the desk as the door opened. Filch was looking triumphant. That vanishing cabinet was extremely valuable, he was saying gleefully to Mrs. Norris. Who will have Peeves this time, my sweet? His eyes fell on Harry and then darted to the quick spell envelope, which Harry realized too late was lying 2 feet away from where it had started. Filch's pasty face went brick red. Harry braced himself for a tidal wave of fury. Filch hobbled across his desk, snatched up the envelope, and threw it into a drawer. Did you read? He spluttered. No, Harry lied quickly. Filch's knobby hands were twisting together. If I thought you'd read my private, not that it's mine, for a friend, but has it maybe, however? Harry was staring at him, alarmed. Filch never looked madder. His eyes were popping like a tick in one of his pouchy cheeks, and his tartan scarf didn't help. Very well, go. Don't breathe a word of that to anyone. However, if you didn't read it, go on now. I have to write up Peeves' report. Go. Amazed by his luck, Harry sprinted out the office, up to the corridor, back up to the stairs to escape Filch's office without punishment. It was probably some kind of school record. Harry, did it work? Nearly Headless Nick came gliding out of the classroom. Behind him, Harry could see a wreckage of large and black gold cabinet appeared to have been dropped from a great height. I persuaded Peeves to crash it right over Filch's office, said Nick eagerly. Thought it might distract him. Was that you? Said Harry gratefully. Yeah, it worked. I didn't even get detention. Thanks, Nick. They set off the corridor together, and Nearly Headless Nick Harry noticed was still holding Sir Patrick's rejection letter. Wish there was something I could do about that headless hunt, Harry said. Nearly Headless Nick stopped in his tracks, and Harry walked right through him. He wished he hadn't. It was like stepping through an icy shower. But there is something you could do for me, Nick said excitedly. Harry, would it be asking too much? But no, you wouldn't want. What's that? Well, this Halloween will be my 500th death day, said Nearly Headless Nick, drawing himself up and looking dignified. Oh, said Harry, not sure whether he should look happy or sad about this. Right. All right, guys, that is where we will stop for today. So I want you guys to think about what is Death Day and what do you think is Nearly Headless Nick's request of Harry at this time. All right, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.